Okay, can you hear me well from the back? I want to make sure that this one, I haven't used a microphone, so I think that it's going to work okay with the microphone if I need to stay more here. So this session is specifically focusing on looking at nitrogen fixation, so we'll be talking about the influence of nitrogen fixation on soybeans, and then many of the projects that I will be presenting today here are projects that we have been conducting in collaboration with Pioneer, now Corteva, and I will be showing a little bit about, we will go through a little bit of history on soybeans, and then we will try to get to the main point on trying to understand basically this relationship between soybean yields and nitrogen fixations. So before we go too far, I mean, there are a couple quick points that we need to really put into foundation when we look at soybeans, okay? One of the main points is about this composition, okay? Think about soybeans, quite different than corn. We focus on protein. It's one of the key factors on the composition. And you will hear on this presentation that we talk about nitrogen. So we will be talking a lot about nitrogen fixation. And one of the key aspects why we focus that much is because on the side of the protein, we look about how much protein and the composition of protein in the seed. And then one of the key factors that we emphasize from the crop breeding is, if you look at crop improvement in the last 40, 50 years, we have increased yields consistently. So yields were going up, if you look at the last 4 decades. But consistently, because we were able to do that, we also have been able to do this, which basically means that we have a trade-off, and protein is going down, okay? So, and the question is, I mean, and we start discussing more about protein, we start having more interest from many companies that they want to start working with farmers to pay for protein. In fact, we have another conversation yesterday with another company that you guys are partnering, John Deere, on looking at oil and trying to understand basically oil composition in the field. So there are a lot of more, I would say, research and questions from farmers, I mean, and companies to understand how we can segregate and trying to capture value from protein and oil in soybeans. And as I mentioned before, that change in yield on soybeans really just penalized mainly protein, because if you look at the oil over time, we haven't seen like a clear trend. We look at oil productivity, so as we are increasing yields, we are producing more oil. But one of the key factors that really changed over time, because we replace less protein with more sugars, okay? This term that we use there, residuals, okay? This residuals is everything that is not protein and oil, okay? When you talk about quality, we usually refer to protein and oil. But everything that is non-protein and oil is what we call the residuals, okay? And those residuals are basically just simple sugars. When you talk to someone, these are like fructose, I mean, different type of sugars. And the challenge that soybeans, I mean, as a crop, I mean, we are seeing over time is that we are trying to increase yields. We need more energy to increase protein. And the plan is shifting the composition. So we can increase yields, we can try to maintain seed weight, but one of the ways to do that is by shifting and almost replacing. Okay, we are replacing protein, and we are putting, rather than protein that is more energy cost, we are putting these sugars. Okay, when you talk to swine, animal nutrition, everything end use connected to animal nutrition, they don't like this. They like more protein. Okay, when you talk about that you have more sugars, that's not good. Okay, and here was a study that we look at seed filling, so all the composition, how dry weight was changing during the seed filling. So, and one of the key aspects, just to emphasize, is that if you look at different varieties, the new varieties, they tend to basically increase the deposition of these sugars much faster. And it's a simple energy balance equation. Okay, if I want to increase yields, one way to increase yields is to replace something that costs me more with something that costs me less. Simple. Okay? The problem by doing that is that we don't know that we are basically really making a negative impact into the quality side. Why we talk about nitrogen in soybeans is because of this. we need to go to this kind of a figure that is probably from the 80s. But what I like about this figure, that if you want to keep it simple, is showing that when you look at the nitrogen that is needed per unit of carbon, soybeans are one of the crops that has the highest demand of nitrogen per unit of carbon. When you look about where is corn on this graph, is down here. Okay? So when you think about why I cannot achieve 100 bushel soybean, one of the answers to that question is you probably don't have enough nitrogen. As simple as that, okay? Because this crop, unless you have more nitrogen, you will not produce yield. You will probably, I don't know how many of you have this experience, but if you are having problems with nodulation, you might find this in the field. I can tell you that I found this in the last 15 years, 20 years almost. I probably found this situation 5 times. It's not very common that you will find this in a field, but you're going to find it. And when you find it, sometimes it's too late. It's too late to make any management change. Because usually you go to the field. I remember one farmer calling us and asking us that there was something going on. When I went to the field, it was around mid-August. And the plants were this size, very big. And when you found this situation in the field, it's already too late. And the main thing that I did is I just say, okay, let's check on the roots. When you check on the roots, and if you don't have any nodules, okay. And why is this? Is because, as we all know, I mean, this process between soybean plants and the rhizobia is critical, and you will going to establish these nodules, okay? It's a symbiosis, okay? And what happens is, I mean, I make the joke all the time that is a marriage. Usually the first years, it goes really well, right? Everything's okay. So early season, when the plant is establishing the symbiosis, there is plenty of sugars. There is plenty of money. Everything goes well until the point, many years after, in the season, it happens that there is not enough sugar. And when there is not enough sugar, or there is competition for the carbon that you are fixing, and this needs to go to the seed or to the rhizobia, that is a problem. Okay? And we will start talking about this. And then when you look at the roots, you will find the situation early season. If you just take a look, when the crop is usually around 1, 2 trifoliates, you will start finding these nodules. If you go too early, you probably will not find it. If you go around B2, B3, you will start finding the nodules. If they are functional, you will find that they have this kind of a pink coloration that it tells you that they are okay. And why we are talking about nitrogen in soybean is because of this. Again, if you want to think about one limiting factor for yield in soybean, in order to increase yields in soybeans, you need more nitrogen. Okay? A 60 bushel soybean crop, I mean, if you look at this graph, it needs close to 300 pounds of nitrogen. So, just a simple math, to produce 20 bushels, you need 100 pounds. Okay? 20 bushels of soybeans needs close to 100 pounds of nitrogen inside of the plant. The main question is soybean limited by nitrogen? Because we start thinking about, and then there was a lot of, I mean, you know, every probably 10 years, it happens that someone is saying, oh, soybeans are limited by nitrogen, and we need to apply nitrogen to soybeans. So, one only thing that I want to make sure that you get out from this presentation is we do not need to apply nitrogen to soybeans, okay? Just let it be. I mean, the plants, they know what they're doing. If they work, and the modulation is working well, we don't need to mess up. So this study, we look at different, maybe you will probably see different genotypes from Pioneer, different release years, okay? And then what you will start looking is, we look at different treatments. We have a situation that is the most common, that, okay, not applying any nitrogen, and then we start playing with what happens if you apply a lot of nitrogen, and then you apply some nitrogen basis. So the summary of all this study is what we found is, we found that, I mean, when we look at this data in the US, and if you look over time, you always tend to see this, that Without nitrogen, the crop does really well. Here is the genetic gain. But when you apply full nitrogen, when you apply a lot of nitrogen to the crop, looks like you have some response. I mean, the response is very minor. So that's why I say don't apply nitrogen to soils, please. But it's telling us something. It's telling us that in order to push yields, we need to find ways of helping this crop and becoming more efficient. Because this fixation, it has a cost. Okay, it's not for free, and it has a cost, and the plant is the one paying the cost. The plant is paying a cost that rather than using the carbon to put more leaves or to grow more, is basically using that carbon going to the roots to fix nitrogen. Okay, and we talk about that we need a lot of nitrogen. So at some point, if someone will say, can we remove the fixation so we can just make the plant to yield 200 bushel? I would say, yeah, do it. I mean, if you can apply 400 pounds of nitrogen, because that will, it's going to take. It's going to take, okay, do it, but be careful, because it's going to become completely anti-economical to do that crop. And the other challenge is, when is the moment, right? Because if you look at the growing season in many of our environments, we usually tend to have nitrogen coming from the soil first, and usually this nitrogen that is coming from the soil is early in the season. We have soil nitrogen coming that is until probably, I would say, in most of our environments we have nitrates, I would say until early to mid-August. When you go to the field around mid-August and you sample, take soil samples, you will not find any nitrogen. Zero nitrates. You might find some ammonia, sometimes. I mean, but nitrates, mainly is telling us that the plant was basically using everything that was available on the soil, and that is a strategy. The plants try to use everything that is available first in the soil, and then when nitrogen is becoming limiting, right, is the moment that the fixation is start increasing. So the fixation, if you look at the amount of nitrogen fixed, is usually when we start getting into the pod formation. So pod formation and then seed filling. That is the moment that this fixation process start ramping up. And one of the challenges that, I mean, as I'm trying to show on this graph is, for example, here I will show that if you are fixing 100% of your nitrogen, we will be on this line. So the total nitrogen needed via fixation versus the amount of the plant needs. But if you look at the data, we have data from multiple studies, multiple years, and it shows that in many cases, if you really want to increase yields, and if you want to get your soybeans, if you look at these numbers of uptake, you are 60 bushels, 70 bushels, 80 bushels. For those high yielding environments, that plant doesn't have enough energy. Okay? So your total in fixation is never 100%. Never. Okay? It's a very high cost, and the plant is going to be first using the nitrogen in the soil, and then it's going to move to the fixation. Okay? And when someone is talking about this concept, is also something that I brought this morning many times, is we talk about the end credit. Okay? And we have this concept, and this concept is completely wrong. When you are coming in a rotation that is a soybean corn rotation, there is not really a credit. And the term credit is probably wrong. Okay? There is probably a crop, and we usually tend to say something that is a cropping system effect, because when you are looking coming from soybean to corn, you have that nitrogen is on soybean residue. And that nitrogen that is on soybean residue is going to be released much faster than any nitrogen that is on corn residue. But if you look at what happens is, how much are you fixing and how much are you taking out from the field? We usually remove every growing season 70% of all the nitrogen that we fix is going out in the seed. 70%, so remember the 300 pounds? So in a 60 bushel soybean, 300 pounds of nitrogen, 70% of that 300 pounds is going out. Which means that if we are fixing less than 70%, our balance is negative. Simple as that. So that's the math. If you look at the data that we have, I mean, we collected data from multiple environments and soils. In many places, even in the situations that we're fixing more than 70%, the chances to leave a positive balance are 50-50. But if you look at what happens, and we have data now from multiple locations, I mean, that is this red line. This red line shows that in many situations, I mean, your balance is more negative than positive. That your chances to have a positive balance are 15%. That in many environments, your balances are more negative. Okay? So if you look at it, we have this project that we conducted the last 2 years, and we look at the total contribution of fixation. So if you look at the pie charts, I mean, this basically shows how much of the total uptake from the plant is coming from fixation versus the soil. What basically is telling us, on average, 40% of the all nitrogen is coming from fixation. So let's go back to the math. If I have a 60 bushel soybean, 300 pounds, 40% fixation. Which means that the rest, 60%, is coming from the soil. Okay? Even in the best case scenario that the roots can contribute 20%, magically, still your balance is negative. Because you have at least 10% of nitrogen that we are removing in the seed, extra compared to what we are fixing. Okay? In overall, it's changing. You know, if you are in different environments, you see that the contribution of fixation could be larger. I mean, here is more like, here is more 50-50. I mean, there are some situations that you have 70%. There are some situations that the soil is giving you much more. I mean, when the growing seasons are very short, you have low yield potential, your fixation gives you less. Okay? And overall, what this is going to show is that it's going to show that unless you have, as we mentioned before, closer to 70% fixation, your balances are negative. Okay? And you see here that as you are increasing yields, you tend to see that this trend is negative. So as we're trying to push for, I would say 30 bushel, 50 bushel, and 70 bushel soybeans, your balances are becoming negative. So the question is, what can we do with this? Because it looks like so far everything is really bad news. But not all is bad news, okay? The key answer for how we can start thinking about this problem is thinking about how we can increase fixation, okay? And the fixation is not a simple process because it's a process that is microorganism driven, but it's also regulated by the plant. Because the plant decides, do I want to continue this? Do I want to stop it? Okay? So it's not like a simple solution here. And you have an example. This year we were doing some studies. Gabriel was conducting this research on using non-nodulating soybeans and then nodulating soybeans. So these are the same genetics, but they have basically a transgene that it helps us to understand if we use the same variety with the ability to nodulate versus the same variety that doesn't have that ability. And for the first time, we start quantifying how big is the problem. Okay? So what he did is start looking at these varieties, and we did a simple study. We just did a study of one variety, non-nodulated, and the same other variety, nodulated, non-nodulated. We did different rates. We have 100 pounds, 200, 300 pounds. When you are nodulating, when everything works well, you see that the yields don't change with the fertilization. Okay? Again, this is a good message because it's saying do not fertilize your soybeans with nitrogen. Because when you are nodulating, it doesn't change. Everything was very similar even when you are looking at different end rates. The problem is if you have problems with nodulation. And if you have problems with nodulation, or if they don't nodulate, like in this case, you start seeing that these plants, they have very poor yield, and as you are applying nitrogen, they tend to respond. And in fact, on this second, we applied 300 pounds to get the same yield than this one, than the one that nodulated. Okay? So that is the size of the problem. It's not a small, it's a big size problem. And then we start thinking about, okay, we have a problem because in many situations we know that nitrogen is limiting, but we don't want to apply nitrogen. We know that we need to start finding ways of creating a diagnostic tool. And that's one of the big issues, is we don't have a diagnostic tool yet to give us information, in-season information, to understand when is the moment that the plant has a deficiency, and then what do I need to do with that. So, and in order to move into this more diagnostic tool, we quantify during the season at flowering and then at seed filling. We quantify the total concentration of nitrogen in the plant. And I want to just to keep us in this situation, without nitrogen application, 0. These are the non-nodulated. So right at flowering, right, they're already telling us, those non-nodulated, that they are getting in deficiency. So which means that before flowering, before R1, we will not be able to find any indication that soybeans are going to tell us that they are suffering a deficiency, okay? But when we are approaching flowering, R1 or R, in the other document that we have is full flowering, then we start detecting that, and this is under no-nitrogen application, that those non-nodulated are showing us that they are under deficiency, which basically is telling us that the amount of nitrogen in the soil is not enough. They don't have enough nitrogen in the soil to keep up with growth. That is the main message on this, okay? And again, the problem is sometimes not nitrogen. And I will show one example that sometimes the problem is you are not fixing the problem by applying more nitrogen. We did this study looking at combinations of nitrogen and sulfur responses. So we did this study looking at AMS and application of gypsum. And then we have many locations. I mean, 2 years, many locations. So we have many studies, many locations that they didn't respond to anything. And you will see they are non-responsive, no response. We don't have any yield benefits. But we have some locations that they respond. And the response was not to nitrogen application, was to sulfur. Okay? And in that case, why we found the response to sulfur? Well, many of these locations were sandy soils with very low organic matter. Okay? But what we start, I think that we start understanding more the fixation process. We start seeing that sulfur was blocking the ability of the plant to fix nitrogen. Okay? I will repeat it. Sulfur was a factor blocking the ability of the plant to fix nitrogen. So again, if I go to the field and if I look at the plants, sometimes by looking at the naked eye, you will not see that there is a difference. But if you are detecting difference on one plant doing, I would say with less performance than the other one, in this situation we found that it's not nitrogen the factor that we need to correct. In this case was by applying sulfur, we were helping the plant to do better. And sometimes what I wanted to emphasize, and I know that it's complex because I work with farmers and we understand the complexity, but we need to understand that there are many situations that there are many co-limitations. When I'm saying co-limitations, it's not always when you go to the field and you see a nitrogen problem, it's not always the best way to solve the problem by just applying more nitrogen. In this case, the way to solve the problem was to understand which one was the factor limiting the fixation. And in this case was just sulfur was the limiting the fixation. Okay? When we are applying sulfur, we start looking at these plants and then we increase the fixation, then we increase the nitrogen status on the plant, and those plants they yield more. Simple as that. So if you want to get some information, just a few takeaways from this one is, it's not that simple, the fixation, but when we have farmers talking to us and telling us we want to increase yields on soybeans, we know that one of the best ways to increase yields in soybeans is by taking a look to the fixation. Okay? Nitrogen fixation is a process that it implies it's a cost for the plant, and unless we start researching and unless we start looking at ways to improve fixation, this plant is being limited. Okay? And we want to try to focus on 80, 90, 100, and more than 100 bushels. We need to find ways of boosting the ability of the plant to fix nitrogen. And again, one point that I always emphasize is, I heard this comment, it's not only on high yielding. You hear that I mentioned high yielding, but we have environments that because we have too much nitrogen in the soil, or we have other conditions, we have environments that they tend to be very low on fixing. We have some soils that they have very high organic matter, or they have some silt clay loam combinations that organic matter is coming too late in the season. That is not good for the fixation because it competes with the moment that the fixation is going up. If the my peak of mineralization is going late in the season and it's being delayed, it's going to compete because when the plant is saying, oh, I'm ramping up the fixation, if the plant is detecting that it's nitrates, it's going to do, ooh. And we have measured this. We have measured that, two things. We have measured that the peak of fixation has an impact, and the second one is also, if it's too late, it's going to make an impact on what is your total. And if it's too early, it's going to make an impact on the process when the fixation is going to start. If you have an early amount of nitrogen in the soil, or if you fertilize for corn and now you are moving to soybeans, all that nitrogen in the system is going to make an impact. And it's going to delay the process of fixation. And if you're going to delay the process of fixation, most likely what is going to happen is that you're going to reach a lower total, okay, lower contribution, because the plant is very smart, and the plant is going to use everything that is in the soil, and then when it's running out, it's going to start the fixation. Okay? So we still are talking about and doing some research on using sensors. What is next? If you think about what is next, there is a lot of work ahead on this. Now we are working on using sensors and trying to understand, can we look at not just working on collecting upper trifoliates, but we are trying to start looking at the entire plant. And can we start developing diagnostic tools? So then we can go and develop something, in-season tool that we can screen with sensors, and then start giving to the farmers much better probability that if they apply a correction on sulfur or anything that we want to recommend, they're going to have some probability to increase yields. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what still we need to do more work on that. I will leave it, I will stop here, and then I will see if I think that we have a few minutes for questions. So, any questions? Yes?
So, do you think it's possible to work towards an ideal nitrogen to sulfur ratio like we do in corn?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And also one of the things that we have from previous presentations, probably we need to send this message very clear, is one recipe doesn't work in all the fields. We have, I think there was a farmer from Canada that was testing sulfur, and he was completely disappointed. Because there are some environments that they're going to be better candidates, that they're going to respond to sulfur applications, and there are some other environments that if you have organic matter, high levels of organic matter, sulfur is connected to organic matter, and the crop only doesn't need big quantities. Just to give you an idea from these nitrogen sulfur studies, how many locations, closer to 55? Yeah, 55, and from 55, 8, we show responses. So this is telling you about the complexity, but it's also telling us the challenge that we have ahead, that we need to identify what are the factors, limiting that soybean crop. And one factor in one field might be sulfur, in another factor in another field might be compaction or pH.
So then, sort of related but not quite, in those areas where we have a customer that might switch from corn to beans.
Yes.
I have it happen a lot in my part of the world. Down south, it's too wet. They just they swap. Is there anything we can do to encourage fixation in those high nitrogen situations? Like the inoculant's not going to make much difference or anything like that?
No. I'm sorry. And again, I want to...
No,
and I want to emphasize this because we have a lot of now new data. Because when we talk about fixation, I have this feeling that many people doesn't care. And then we have people talking about sustainability, and I'm like, okay, wait, wait 1 second. You talk about sustainability and you don't care about this?
Yeah.
The only thing about sustainability for soybeans is this. The only. I would say the number one for sure. Then we can talk about carbon, then we can talk about other things, but this is the sustainability point. And for me, corn is helping on these corn soybean systems. Corn is the one helping us to be more sustainable, because we tend to usually apply quite a bit of nitrogen to the system, and then we're basically mining less. But when you want to switch, if a farmer is switching from corn to soybean, or what is going to happen is all the nitrogen that is on that system is going to delay the infection. So you plant your soybeans, you have a lot of nitrate, the plant is growing and it's growing really fast. You will detect this. The plant is growing super fast because when it's using nitrogen from the soil, it's using less carbon from the fixation. And you will see this, we have seen this year in some way that those plants are growing faster, but at some point, they're going to run out. And then the fixation is going to give you a little bit more, but the plant knows how to use this. The plant is very smart and saying, I will use everything that is on the soil and then I will switch. I will switch to fixation once I'm running out of the soil.
How long does it take the plant to figure that out? Like figure out, hey, I need to start fixating.
I mean, the plant knows this because the plant is basically is going to deplete everything that is available at planting. It's going to use everything on the mineralization. What you hope is to make sure that hopefully this doesn't completely inhibit. So the only thing that I will be worried if you apply a lot of nitrogen is I want to go and look at those plants and make sure that I have at least 1 or 2 or 3 nodules. Because you want to make sure that at some point they're going to start. If we have 0 nodules, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know, we can go, yeah.
Okay, so we've always, I guess it seems to me from your data, you've kind of drawn the line in the sand that if we're going to go over, say, 80 bushels or whatever it is, that you feel like sulfur is starting to play a bigger role in that efficiency. Is that fair?
Not always. Not always, because
okay.
I would say that if we want to go to 80, 90, 100 bushel plus, we need to start taking a look to this fixation because, and then in one field might be sulfur, in another field might be phosphorus, in another field might be correcting your pH, in another field might be, so depending on your field, we need to think about what factor is limiting the plant. Because the only way to get to 80, 90, 100 bushel is to make sure that you have a big size plant.
Right. Okay, so let's say we remove compaction and drainage, those couple issues, and we've always operated with the idea that we have a better response to sulfur early in the season, then that soil's warm, mineralization takes place.
Yes.
More sulfur is available.
Yes.
But if we want to take the next step to help our growers achieve high yields, have you considered doing some research in those environments to see what levels of sulfur help things become more efficient for a longer fixation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, we have a few environments. In fact, we did a lot of research in one of our environments that was 100 bushel a couple of years ago. The problem with fixation is, and this is an issue, that fixation established really early in the season. So it's really hard to make too many changes late. We try to do many things late in the season, and we're still not helping the plant. So for me, fixation is something that is not just a moment. For me, it's unless we start taking care of the plant from the beginning of planting all the way to seed filling, if we don't do a really good, proper management, avoid insect defoliation, avoid this plant health, and we make sure that the plant reaches this seed filling with the best chance to basically make sure that you have enough sugars. Because at the end of the day, the plant at that moment, late in the season, is running out of sugar.
So have you compared this, like the system, so you're saying eliminate whatever nitrate is in the soil first to stimulate that fixation as early as possible. To do that, you put like the nitrogen-hungry cover crop out in the fall so that you're trying to eliminate as much nitrogen out of that profile as you can to kind of compare the fixation rates to that?
No, we haven't done that. I mean, there was a study, I think that is in Kentucky, that they did something similar to that. The challenge, remember that even if you put a cover crop early, that nitrogen is going to come out. And sometimes it's going to come out in the worst time. It's going to come out in mid-August. And remember that if that nitrogen is...
Do you want the nitrogen according to your...
Not necessarily. I want, if you ask me, because I usually try not to outsmart the crop. I feel that soybeans is smarter than myself and smarter than many of us. By mid-August, we need to make sure, and the plant does this, that the soil profile is nothing, 0. Because we want to make sure that by that time, until the end of the season, the plant is using fixation, is running on fixation. If you put, or if there is nitrogen coming out, it's confounding the plant. Because if the plant is sensing, the roots are sensing that there is nitrogen in the soil, they're going to reduce the fixation. Because the fixation, remember, is a cost for the plant. And if I have nitrogen available, why? Why you are paying for a system or for a service if you have nitrogen that is for free? Okay? The problem that the plant doesn't realize is that the plant cannot do that, because if you need to put 150 units of nitrogen during seed filling, you will not have 150 units of nitrogen coming from a cover crop. You might get 50 and the plant gets confused, and by the time that you use that 50, the plant is done with the fixation and you are basically getting into rush to maturity. Because anytime that the nitrogen is limiting you, the plant is going to go to maturity.
Okay, what about, say, micronutrients like molybdenum and iron that are key with nitrogenase enzyme? Have you put any of that on early to help with those levels, or even measure those levels?
We have done one study looking at azospirillum because we apply rhizome with azospirillum. We have another study looking at another factor, and sometimes it's really tough to increase fixation. There are some studies, if you look at Brazil, in those environments that soils are not good enough, in terms of fertility, they need micronutrients, because then there are some micronutrients that are limiting the fixation. In many of our soils, I didn't find yet soils that they really need micronutrients. And again, we need to do more research, on really testing that to make sure that we get a conclusion. But so far, anything that we have been tested, we haven't seen much responses on that small nutrient doses.
All right, we got to wrap.
Yeah, sorry. I need to run. Okay, thank you guys. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
He says he only can. Okay.